Next item on the agenda is the situation in Thailand, and I turn first to the authors of the resolution, and firstly Mrs. Schaake for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Thailand is going through a violent crisis. The red shirt demonstrators on the one hand and the army and the yellow shirts on the other. Around 80 people have already lost their lives and nearly 2,000 have been injured. Democracy is threatened and the country finds itself in a government-declared state of emergency. And the state of emergency has resulted in censorship. Media sources such as TV, radio and internet have been blocked. Halting violence is very important and we encourage all parties to use self-restraint in the process of doing so. But in seeking to restore the calm, the state of emergency should not be abused to restrict fundamental rights and individual freedoms. Censorship needs to end and freedom of media and expression need to be restored. These values are important for the European Parliament in their valuable relationship with Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Preda for 1 minute, please.
Mulțumesc mult, doamna președintă. Așa cum am putut constata.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We have all observed what's going on here. It's in the news, and since April, Thailand has been going through a very difficult, violent period, and this is unprecedented over the last 10 years. First of all, I'd like to express my solidarity for the families who have lost loved ones because of violence in the streets, and what we're seeing here is almost a classical confrontation between the freedom of the press and then the need for the government to maintain public order. We have seen some very turbulent situations over the last few days, but it seems now calm has returned to Bangkok, even though last night the capital was in flames because of police intervention. So we hope we're going to be able to avoid a spiraling of violence here, but in order for that to happen, we've got to act with moderation. Democracy cannot be built on violence, and I think the government should be applying the roadmap that was drafted on the 3rd of May, and in addition to that roadmap, you've really got to bring the guilty to task. Thank you.
Well, the red shirts demonstrations have been suppressed with the spilling of blood. Of course, EP urgency is designed to try to appease things and to look for solutions rather than make matters worse. But what I would like to say is that all citizens should expect to be able to enjoy free, legitimate and fair elections. This is undeniable, and this is a right which must be granted to all citizens or nationals of Thailand. This was said by Prime Minister Vejajiva, but we do really have to come back to this concept. And I also condemn the fact that real bullets were used against the demonstrators. According to official sources, 12 victims fell as a result of these events, including one Italian journalist, and many people were injured. So it is time to stop this. I'm not going to promote one side or the other, but I would urge the government to give priority to negotiations rather than simply try to restrict individual freedoms and the freedom of expression by a law on the state of emergency, because this will simply exacerbate matters. And I would call on the government to think of calling elections, because this could lead to a divide in the country. In the northeast, a rural area of Laotian culture, we could have a type of rebellion vis-à-vis Bangkok and the south. And there could be a virtually a quasi-terrorist movement which could emerge, which could attack bureaucracy and the elite, which are the bastions of the powers that be. We've got to try to come back to the negotiation table, put an end to violence, but at the same time maintain freedoms. These are very simple words, perhaps very naive compared to the violence perpetrated today. And this parliamentary resolution has been deliberately been restrained so as to allow for dialogue between those concerned. But at the same time, we must call on the government for democracy.
For 1.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, President. The pictures of the violence and destruction in Bangkok are clear still in our minds. Now, perhaps the violence is a little less visible today. However, the risk of further violent confrontations cannot yet be ruled out. The conflict between the red and yellow shirts, the latter, supported by the army, has already claimed 70 lives and seen 2,000 injured. Now, the government has said it will investigate the deaths, and I hope it investigates the deaths over the last couple of days as well. An enduring political solution to this problem will have to take into account the underlying causes of the conflict. Part of the population in Thailand is marginalized and disadvantaged, and they're complaining about their violated rights and their low standard of living. There's also corruption amongst the political elite and indeed those in positions of responsibility in civil society. These problems have to be clearly identified if we're to have a sustainable and enduring resolution to this problem. Otherwise there'll be further violence. The conflicting parties, we would call upon them to take part in the process of finding this resolution to the problem and to use only peaceful means to do so. And to do that they need EU support.
For 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam President. For several weeks now, the Red Shirts popular movement was asking for democracy in Bangkok. We have to recall that the current government, even if the president has been in power only since December 2008, actually came to power with a military coup d'etat dating back to September 2006. The Red Shirts then are asking for the resignation of the Prime Minister and the dissolution of Parliament, new early elections. So they're basically asking for democracy. On the 4th of May, the Prime Minister announced a reconciliation plan with these famous early elections in the front line, but on the 13th of May the chief of the Red Shirts actually brought an end to the negotiations, and in this context we prepared this resolution which is submitted today. Yesterday the army intervened, causing several deaths, including an Italian journalist, and it's absolutely indispensable that this resolution we adopt takes account of these events, particularly given that the main leaders of the Red Shirts today gave up immediately and asked people, or called for calm. So really we're talking about the succession of the king here. That's been called into question, and he is extremely silenced, dubiously so. We have got to basically argue that democracy cannot be forced through, and it's not acceptable to squash demonstrations by shooting people. The resolution doesn't even condemn the violence. We don't talk about this. The Thai people have the right to democracy, and we've got everything to do to make sure we avoid a further military coup. I'm terribly sorry, Madam President.
Mr. Bieland, for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. Recent events in Thailand, a country that was considered a mainstay of democracy in Southeast Asia, are the most dramatic events of the last 50 years. The conflict between the supporters of Mr. Shinawatra, the Red Shirts, and the government and the army has caused the death of more than 60 people, including foreigners and nationals of EU countries. 2,000 people have been injured, and Bangkok has in many parts been severely damaged. I'd like to express my sympathies to the people of Thailand, but let's be clear that the Thai nation is divided today, and they don't have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. It's going to be very difficult to solve these problems peacefully and politically. However, pressure from the EU on both sides is necessary to encourage them to sit down at the table and turn to political and dialogue rather than violence to solve their differences.
Speakers on behalf of the political groups, and firstly from the EPP group, Mr. Mann, for 1 minute, please.
Im bürgerkriegsähnlichen Straßenkampf
The street fighting, which resemble civil war, have killed many and injured even more. Now the leaders of the protesters surrendered after a military operation against them. However, now all of the capital has been affected, even the east of the city. And I think that the dramatic pictures we're seeing should tell us one thing. Regardless of whether the people we can see are in red, yellow or black shirts, we should try and stop the situation escalating. The EPP is very clear. There is no alternative to dialogue, and an independent commission should be set up to investigate the events. We'd like also to see early elections in Thailand.